I actually didn't start composing until very late, not until kind of the latter half of college. So I grew up playing classical piano. I had actually requested, I remember very clearly asking my parents if I could play cello. My older sister plays the violin, and I thought that would, kind of play a string instrument as well. And they said, no, but you can play the piano, because we had one. We had a little Yamaha upright. So I started playing Chopin and Bach and Beethoven and all that great music on the piano. And then I went to a middle school called the Crowden School in Berkeley, which is a kind of unique elementary and middle school that requires all their students to play music for 2 hours in the morning. It was run by this unbelievably powerful and direct and generous Scottish woman named Anne Crowden. And as a pianist, if I were to join the school, the deal was that if I picked up a bass, that I could play the occasional Bach concerto or whatever with the orchestra. So I started playing bass, and then when I was in high school, I decided that I was interested in improvisation, and I started to play jazz, and I taught myself how to play chord changes and whatnot. And I spent actually much more time improvising and kind of creating my own music that way. And then it was kind of a natural outgrowth from there, where I started realizing that I was actually making my own music, and then I started writing it down and was writing for both jazz ensembles and chamber ensembles and for electronics and whatnot. But I grew up in a very musical family. My father's a composer, and my mom won't admit it, but she's also a composer. And as I mentioned before, my sister was a violinist. So there was music. There was music everywhere, and there was contemporary music around me since I was young. But I kind of naturally ended up writing music. It wasn't something that I did right off the bat when I was young. So. That's a really interesting question, because my life is constantly changing. Up until actually this year, every year I was in a different location and had a different set of resources. So I'm used to constantly reinventing the process in which I write music. And I mean, a big part for me is definitely improvisation. I like to sit at the piano and come up with harmonies and pacing that way. But that's kind of difficult because now I live in Brooklyn in a tiny little apartment in Crown Heights, and I don't have a piano. I have to do things either just with a piece of paper and a pencil, or sometimes I'll do some sketches on my computer. Although I really don't like doing that. I like the process of composing music to be a little bit more kind of organic and corporeal. So yeah, it's constantly changing, and I imagine that it will continue to change. But I kind of like that. It means that each piece is going to be unique, not just in the way that it sounds, its shape, its form, its harmonies, its rhythm, but it is also going to be unique in the way that it came to be, meaning different resources, or whether I compose it at a piano or by strumming a guitar, or however that might be. So for this particular piece that I wrote for New World, like I said, I wrote it when I had just moved to Brooklyn. So I would sketch kind of short score as much as I possibly could whenever I had access to a piano. Either that was in a Juilliard practice room, or I was borrowing this nice, kind lady's piano in her basement. I would kind of sneak in in the mornings and just sketch as much as I possibly could. But a lot of the process of writing this piece was just kind of sitting at a desk, with a pencil and orchestrating that way without an instrument nearby me. So.
Wow.
right when I had moved to New York, I sent out scores to many organizations and to many people, sometimes by their request and sometimes just, kind of cold calling and saying, hey, look what I'm doing. And he took interest and invited me over, and we had a conversation. He said, look at what happened. Look at what's happening at New World, and he invited me down, and he said, if you think you have a good idea for a project, give me a proposal, and we'll see if we can make it happen. And at that time, I had been working primarily with 3 musicians working on these pieces called tension studies, which dealt with really kind of complex textures of noise and filtration and creating harmonies and textures by kind of putting frequency bandwidth limiters on this noise and kind of creating harmonies that way. But up until then, it had been primarily kind of computer-generated noise that I was working with, and I thought that with the hall and with the satellite stages, or whatever you want to call them, and the percussionists, that almost immediately I was like, oh, I want to do the same thing, but with acoustic instruments. So I wanted to create this world of dense noise and complex textures full of potential energy, and take those sounds and pull out the harmonies from them with my computer, and then put them up back in the cell speakers in the hall to kind of create this both intense but also very beautiful world. So that's kind of how that project came about. I let Doug and Michael know my idea, and I think at first they had no idea what I was talking about. But as the process kind of went along, and I was able to kind of articulate a little bit clearer, what I was aiming to do, and showed them the score, things are kind of taking shape. So. The idea behind the piece is creating a narrative that anyone can relate to. This idea of moving far away and closer to something, drifting, and then the idea of providence, provisions, things being given to you, or a sense of responsibility. But I think it also has to do with, for me at least, kind of moving from the West to the East in the United States, and I feel very strongly that there is a difference, kind of in the psychology, or the way that people think, or the way that they behave, and also of course the musical language of the Western United States and the Eastern United States, I feel are actually kind of distinct. And so I was writing this piece at a time when I was still kind of dealing with those things. So for me, it's very much about kind of like moving away from home and kind of moving back and trying to figure things out in that sense. So the title, for example, Title 1 is Embarcadero, which I like because, on a personal level, it's a place in San Francisco, but it's also it's a Spanish term for, embarking, leaving something, kind of setting off on a journey. And then the third movement, Divisadero, is also kind of a street in San Francisco that splits, the two halves of the city. But it's also a concept that means kind of looking at something from afar. So to me, emotionally, the piece is a little bit about kind of leaving the West and going back East and kind of looking at it and seeing what it looks like, from New York and from all the noise and from this new kind of chapter in my life. So, but those are the kind of personal ramifications. But I think that hopefully, the acoustics of the piece and the way that it flows, that all that will be kind of archetypal and something that people can also relate to musically. Yeah, the idea of white noise is just kind of filling up the whole frequency spectrum of sound that human beings can perceive. So that's between 20 hertz, we can barely hear it, all the way up until to 20,000 hertz, which, a lot of people can't even hear, but very, very high frequencies. So white noise, what we hear in a staticky television screen or on the radio or whatever, is that full spectrum kind of filled richly. And what I'm doing with the percussion is I'm kind of trying to emulate this sound by scraping metallic objects together and whatnot to kind of fill the spectrum. We're not getting so many of the low frequencies, but we're kind of getting, maybe between 400 all the way up to 20,000. But what I'm doing with my computer is I'm taking microphones and I'm picking up this sound, this very rich spectrum, and I'm pulling it from the microphones, and I've created this, what we call a patch, which is basically a customized computer program that will limit the frequency, right? So if we have this very kind of rich spectrum, what my computer is doing is saying, hey, take that B out of this noise and take that A sharp and attenuate everything else, so all we hear is this interval. So it's complex, and the hours that it took to actually develop that program using software called Max MSP, which was developed back west where I'm from. It's probably overly complicated, but the main idea is, it's just kind of isolating these frequencies from within this noise. It's hard to say if we're going in the right or wrong direction, but I do feel like there is this openness now with composers. It seems like, reading the history books, in the last century, there was this big debate between, is it atonal, or is it tonal, or, is it spectral, or does it have pop references, or... I don't think composers really care about that anymore. I think, whether it's atonal or tonal, that raising that question is just as important as asking the question, does it have a slide whistle in it, or does it, you know what I'm saying? So I think composers are really open now to just kind of writing music and not writing classical music. And if it happens to be that an awesome organization like New World says, hey, come and write us a piece, I would argue that a lot of composers would, obviously they're going to use the chops that they've learned, but I don't think that they would be thinking about it as they had to write the next great orchestral work. At least for me, I'm more concerned with just reaching people. And I think, especially living in a place like New York right now, there are so many, I guess what are called, I don't really like this phrase, but indie classical groups popping up, and singer-songwriters who are composing for larger ensembles, and composer-performers who are introducing new instruments into the so-called classical realm. And then of course, like with what I'm doing, there's this whole new thing with, well, it's not new. Obviously technology, electronics and all this stuff has been around for a while, but it's so powerful now, and the amount that we can do with just a single laptop is so much that I think that there really is this, this potential for really interesting and new directions. Of course, when you're dealing with technology in a situation like this, you have to be, there are a lot of issues that can come about, because classical musicians are very patient in many ways, and also impatient when it comes to other things. But yeah, there's we're definitely heading in an interesting direction. Yeah. I feel like this is such an amazing opportunity because, for a number of reasons, but it's really rare for people my age, or people in general, to get to write for large ensemble or orchestra, and to be able to do it in this particular forum is really incredible. The best musicians of my generation, and then also working with MTT and working in this brand new building, and having a community that's very patient and willing to give you suggestions and take time if you have to make revisions and whatnot. It's just really like an incredible opportunity, and I'm learning a lot from being here. So this is definitely like one of the coolest things that I've ever done. So